So today we're going to start by taking our notes on 1-point perspective and learning how to draw very simple, basic 1-point perspective cubes or boxes. So the first thing that I'd like for you to do is take your sketchbook and turn your page to where it is horizontally in landscape mode, meaning that it's wider than it is tall. That's going to be really important in a linear perspective drawing in order to give it more accurate and realistic proportions and have enough space to draw. And then you'll also need today a ruler and a pencil. Now I recommend a mechanical pencil because it always has a really fine, sharp point. But you can also use a regular pencil as long as you keep it sharpened while you're using it. Once you have your paper and your pencil and ruler ready to go, what we're going to do today is create sort of a draw along notes style sketchbook page. So everything that I draw and write, I want you to copy down on your paper, and we're going to do this very step by step together. You can pause this video as you go through it in order for you to stay with me as we go through the different steps. So the first thing that you're going to do is at the top of your page, label this 1-point perspective notes, and then put your name in the top right-hand corner. Once you have this finished, we are going to take our ruler and find a nice true horizontal line. And we're going to drop it down about halfway down the page. And you want to make sure that when you find the middle of your page and you find this horizontal line, make sure that it's a true horizontal. Compare the edge of your ruler to the edge of your paper to make sure that they're not tilted. They should be perfectly parallel. And once you've found that, you're going to bring a line all the way across your piece of paper. Now this line is really important. This has a very special name. This is called the horizon line. And the horizon line is going to represent your eye level. So from where you are looking out into the world, this is that imaginary line far off in the distance where things appear to recede to. So we're going to label this over here on the side. Next, in about the middle of this line, we're going to make a very small dot. And this dot is going to represent our vanishing point. Now, a vanishing point is going to be where things appear to diminish as they move back in space. And as things get further away, they get smaller and smaller and smaller until they appear to essentially disappear or vanish way, way far back in the distance. So a good example of that, which you've probably all seen an example before, is an illustration like this, where as things are close to you, like this road, they're much larger or wider or much taller. And as things move back, they get smaller and smaller until they appear to disappear way in the distance along the horizon line at the vanishing point. So that's a great illustration. You've probably seen that before. But we're going to take that same idea today and apply it to three-dimensional cubes. So in 1-point perspective, there are 3 basic steps that we will use in order to draw a cube or a box in 1-point perspective. So right here in about the middle, up above, we're going to write out the steps. And there are 3 of them that we're going to talk about. And we'll fill those in as we go. Now, in order for us to start drawing a cube, what we're going to draw first is the front face of a cube, the part of the cube that is looking at you directly, that you see straight on. So we are going to begin by drawing a 2-inch square to represent this. And we're going to draw that square up here in this upper left corner. And you want to make sure that you draw it a good bit above the horizon line, just because it makes it a little bit easier to draw for the first few times. But I'm going to start out with a nice 2-inch square, making sure that my horizontal lines are a nice true horizontal when compared to the edge of the page, and that my vertical lines are a nice true vertical when compared with the edge of the page. Keeping everything square and plumb in a perspective drawing is extremely important, and you will learn and you'll get better at this as you practice. But one thing that I like to do is stand when I'm drawing because that way I can see it from directly above, and that helps me see the perspective a little bit easier. Now, if at this point you want to check and make sure that your square should be exactly 2 inches across and 2 inches down, and then if you see any inaccuracies, if any line looks even just a tiny bit crooked, you want to make those adjustments now, because that's very important in order for the steps later on in order to work out for our cube to be perfect. And I think when I look at my drawing right here, this bottom horizontal line looks like it leans up just the tiniest bit on the left, so I'm going to make an adjustment to fix that. Now I think that looks much better. I feel like that looks much more plumb and square. So that is the first step of drawing a cube in 1-point perspective. We are going to draw a square, which represents the front face. Now our second step is going to be to take each of the corners, all 4, to the vanishing point. Now there's one special trick when it comes to this. If the corner can go straight to the vanishing point without having anything that it runs into, you want that to be a solid line. But if it's a corner like this top left one, where it has to go through the face of that square to get to the vanishing point, we're going to make that one a dotted line, because technically in the real world we wouldn't see that. So we're going to draw it where it looks sort of transparent. So I'll start down here with this first corner and take it to the vanishing point. And I want to make sure that I line everything up very, very carefully and very precisely and go exactly from the corner to the vanishing point. A good trick that I like to use is you can hold your pencil point on your vanishing point and then rotate your ruler to your corner, and that will sometimes save you a little bit of time. It's a good trick that helps you with accuracy as you are drawing in your corner to the vanishing point. So there are those bottom 2. I'll now take this top one and then this one, since it goes through the face of the square, I'm going to make this one with a dotted line. And I like to recommend that you always make your dots very small and short and very close together. Going all the way back to that vanishing point. So what we have now is step number 2. We're going to take all of the corners. We're going to take them to the vanishing point, and I'm going to abbreviate that to VP. So I'll draw a little square. Like that. Now what this represents, any line that goes to the vanishing point is called a diminishing line. And that's because when it's closest to us, it's near, and as it gets further away, it's getting smaller and smaller, diminishing away from us until it gets to that vanishing point. Now right now, what we have is a cube that would go on and on forever into infinity and has no end. So the third step is really important. We need to be able to cut the back of this box off and give it an end. That way it doesn't look like it goes on and on forever. So if the front face of our cube is a square, then the back face of our cube is also going to be a square. So what happens is we're going to take these front lines, that front vertical for example, and slide it down its diminishing lines to the back edge and put in another vertical. So the front square will have a matching back square that's further down those diminishing lines. And that sounds really confusing, but once you've done it a couple times and you followed along with me, it'll make sense. So I'm going to start by taking this first vertical and slide my ruler back a little ways. And I'm going to slide down along those diminishing lines. And for this part, you can sort of just eyeball the distance, the depth. The longer you make it, the longer that cube is going to be. The closer to the front, the shorter and narrower it's going to be. So I just sort of give it a good guesstimate with what I think looks about right for a cube. And where that front vertical is, in between those diminishing lines, I will now draw a matching back vertical. So that's now the first line in cutting off and drawing the back face, which is a square. So we have a vertical with a matching back vertical. And then the square turns and has a horizontal at the bottom. So we're going to take that front horizontal at the bottom and slide it back until it runs into this new line that we just made. And this is going to create the bottom of our cube. You should be able to see that right there. So making sure that this part stays a true horizontal. This part's really tricky because it's very easy to get that line tilted and get it crooked, but it has to be a true horizontal. So compare your ruler to the edge of your page and go from this line over to there. And now you can see that we've given the bottom of our cube a back edge. Now if we're drawing this as a square, we're halfway there. We have the right side, the bottom, and now we need to draw the left side. So where this horizontal line hits and creates this back corner, right there, we're going to draw a vertical. But since this part of the cube goes through the front face, instead of it being a solid line, we're going to make it a dotted line. Up to this diminishing line. So basically, this back line is the matching line compared to this front line. So front vertical has a matching back vertical. And now our square is almost done. We have the right side, the bottom, the left side, and now we just need the top. So this corner should match up horizontally with this corner. And if you've done everything correctly, your ruler should match it up and give it a nice perfect square. And since this also goes through that front face of the cube, we're going to make this a dotted line as well. And now you should be able to see a complete square, 1, 2, 3, 4, that represents that whole back face of our cube. So for our third step, we are going to draw the back face. So we started with a square, we drew our diminishing lines, and now we're going to draw our back square. And if you remember, you probably drew these in elementary school or middle school. This is just a more complex version of, if you ever remember drawing, you drew one square, and then you drew another square, and then you connected them with your corners to draw a 3D cube. This is very, very similar to that method, except instead of just connecting the corners, those corners are actually diminishing to a vanishing point, just drawing it in a little bit more of a complex way. And now that we have this box complete, we are going to erase some of the things that we no longer need completely. So any of the lines that go out beyond the box on the way to the vanishing point, we're going to erase those to make it a little bit easier to see the cube. So now that should make it a little bit easier to start to see, but there's one more thing that we need to erase. If you look from this top corner at the diminishing line that's dotted going to this back corner, we need that part of the line. However, any of the dots that extend past that, we don't need those because those are technically outside of or behind the box. So we're going to erase those as well. And now you are left with your cube. You should be able to see the front face as a square, the back face as a square, and then connecting them, you should have your 4 diminishing lines. And that is your very first cube. Now, if that didn't work out perfectly this first time, don't worry, we're gonna practice this skill a lot more. We're gonna do it one more time today and then several more times tomorrow just to practice and get good at it. This is something that just takes practice, and you have to do it a couple times in order for it to make sense and to get really good at it. So if you notice when you do get finished, if this back square is not a true perfect square, let's say, for example, this line didn't match up where these 2 corners met and it ended up being crooked, what that should tell you is that one of the first lines that you drew may be crooked, which then is going to throw off that very last line that you drew. So again, that's something that as you practice it, you will get better. Since we have this finished, I want to talk to you a little bit about how all of these lines come together and make sure that we understand what's happening. In space, in the 3-dimensional world, there are 3 specific dimensions that we can talk about. So you always hear people talk about things being 3D. This is what they're talking about, where things look very voluminous and 3-dimensional. So the 3 dimensions of space are height, width, and depth. In 1-point perspective, the height of an object is always represented with a vertical line. So if you look at our cube, we can tell how tall it is because of how tall the verticals are. So we're going to create a little section, and we're going to label this our height. I'm just going to label that with an H for the height. So height is always represented with a vertical line. Now the width of a cube is always going to be represented in 1-point perspective with a horizontal line. We can tell how wide it is based on how wide across that horizontal line is. So we're going to label this our width with a W. And so width is always represented by a horizontal. And then the depth of the cube, the part of the object that's moving back in space, showing how deep and far back into space it goes, that is always going to be represented with a diminishing line. So a line that is going to the vanishing point. So we'll label this one our depth. And depth is always represented with a diminishing line. So those are our 3 dimensions of space and how they are represented in 1-point perspective when you're drawing a cube. Now it's really important that you kind of understand how that works, height, width, and depth, because when we start to draw more complex things, it's going to be very important that you can sort of problem solve more difficult things. And if you understand those 3 dimensions of space, it's really going to help you understand what type of line you should be drawing. So the next thing that we're going to do on our notes today is we're going to draw one more cube together, but this time we're going to draw in the lower right-hand corner. And I think I may actually have to move my vanishing point label. So we're going to start off by drawing a 2-inch square. And again, I'm going to drop it down a good ways below the horizon line just to help make it a little bit easier to draw and easier to see. So that is our first step complete. I have drawn the front face as a square. And now I'm going to move on to step number 2, which is taking my corners to the vanishing point. Now remember, if it's a corner that can go straight to the vanishing point without running through the square, it'll be a solid line. But if it's a corner that has to go through the square to get to the vanishing point, that one will be a dotted line. So now that I have all four corners going to my vanishing point, and this bottom right one this time is the one that's dotted, remember to make sure that your dots are very short and very close together. That helps make these drawings look more realistic. Now we're ready to move on to our third step, which is to draw the back face or the back square. So I'm going to start this time with this front vertical over here on the left-hand side. If I take that front vertical and slide my line back along those diminishing lines, decide how far back I want that cube to go, and along those diminishing lines, I will drop in another vertical. So there's my left side. Now I'm going to create the top of my cube this time, so I'm going to take this horizontal here and slide it back until it meets up with my new back corner right there. Now double check that this line is a perfect horizontal. It's very, very easy to let this line get tilted, but then the top of our cube won't look correct. So make sure it's perfectly straight. Again, compare it to the edge of your paper and draw a line from our back left corner over to what will become that back right corner. And now we have two sides of this cube complete. Now we're going to finish it by adding in our vertical from this corner coming down. But again, since it goes through the box, this time it will be dotted. And I'm going to drop it down until I get to this back corner where it runs into the diminishing line from the front corner. That tells me where to stop it. And now all I have left to do is to take the bottom and make sure I connect those two bottom back corners. And they should meet up with a nice corner to corner with a perfect horizontal. Now we're going to go through and erase the extra lines that we no longer need to clean this up a little bit. So the lines that are outside of the cube will erase. And for our dotted line, remember we only need the dotted line from the front corner to the back corner. So any of the dots past that, we can erase those as well. And then you have your completed square. So now we have our front face, which is a square. We have our four diminishing lines going back to our vanishing point. And then we have our back square. The last thing I want to point out to you is, remember how we talked about the horizon line represents our eye level? And that's how far up or down you are from your personal perspective. So one really important thing I want to point out to you is, if you have a cube that is below the horizon line, like this one here, notice that if it's below the horizon line, that means it's below our eye level, and therefore we can see the top of that cube. But if it's a cube like this one that's above the horizon line, that means it's above our eye level, so this time we can see the bottom of the cube. And that's really important that you sort of understand. Now, we'll experiment tomorrow drawing cubes maybe that overlap the horizon line, some that are above, some that are below, in all sorts of different positions. But for today, we're just going to practice by drawing those two.